Section 2 of Your Mind and How to Use It by William Walker Atkinson. Chapter 4. Consciousness. The fact of consciousness is the great mystery of psychology. It is difficult even to define the term, although every person of average intelligence understands what is sought to be conveyed by it. Webster defines it as knowledge of one's own existence, sensations, mental operations, etc. Immediate knowledge or perception of any object, state, or sensation. Being aware. Being sensible of. Another authority defines the term as the state of being aware of one's sensations, the power, faculty, or mental image of being aware of one's own existence, condition at the moment, thoughts, feelings, and actions. Halleck's definition is that indefinable characteristic of mental states which causes us to be aware of them. It will be seen that the idea of awareness is the essence of the idea of consciousness, but, at the last, we are compelled to acknowledge that it is impossible to closely define consciousness, for it is something so entirely unique and different from anything else that we have no other terms at all synonymous to it. We can define it only in its own terms, as we have seen by reference to the definitions above given, and it is equally impossible to clearly account for its appearance and being. Huxley has well said, "How it is that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about by the result of irritating nervous tissue is just as unaccountable as the appearance of the Jinnee when Aladdin rubbed his lamp." All that we can ever know regarding the nature of consciousness must be learned from turning the consciousness in ourselves back upon itself, by focusing consciousness upon its own mental operations by means of introspection. By turning inward the conscious gaze, we may perceive the flow of the stream of thought from its rise from the subconscious regions of the mind to its final disappearance in the same region. It is a common error to suppose that we are directly conscious of objects outside of ourselves. This is impossible, for there is no direct knowledge of such outside objects. We are conscious merely of our sensations of, or mental images of, the outside objects. All that is possible for us to be directly conscious of are our own mental experiences or states. We cannot be directly conscious of anything outside of our own minds. We are not directly conscious of the tree which we see. We are directly conscious merely of the sensation of the nerves arising from the impact of the light waves carrying the image of the tree. We are not directly conscious of the tree when we touch it and perceive its character in that way. We are directly conscious merely of the sensation reported by the nerves in the fingertips which have come in contact with the tree. We are directly conscious even of our own bodies only in the same way. It is necessary for the mind to experience that of which it may become conscious. We are conscious only of 1. That which our mind is experiencing at this moment, or 2. That which it has experienced in the past, and which is being re-experienced this moment by the process of the memory, or which is being recombined or rearranged this moment by the imagination. Subconscious planes. But it must not be thought that every mental state or mental fact is in the field of consciousness. This error has been exploded for many years. The fact is now recognized that the field of consciousness is a very narrow and limited one, and that the great field of mental activity lies outside its narrow limit. Beyond and outside of the narrow field of consciousness lies the great subconscious storehouse of memory in which are stored the experiences of the past, to be drawn again into the field of consciousness by an effort of the will in the act of recollection, or by association in ordinary remembrance. In that great region also the mind manifests many of its activities and performs much of its work. In that great region are evolved the emotions and feelings which play such an important part in our lives, and which often manifest a vague disturbing unrest long before they rise to the plane of consciousness. In that great region are produced the ideas, feelings, and conceptions which rise to the plane of consciousness and manifest that which men call genius. On the subconscious plane The imagination does much of its work, and startles its owner by presenting him with the accomplished result in the field of consciousness. In the subconscious field is performed that peculiar process of mental mastication, digestion, and assimilation with which all brain workers are familiar, and which absorbs the raw mental material given it, separates, digests, and assimilates it, and re-presents it to the conscious faculties some time after as a transformed substance. It has been estimated that at least 85% of our mental activities are performed below or outside of the field of consciousness. The psychology of today is paying much attention to this formerly neglected great area or areas of the mind. The psychology of tomorrow will pay still greater attention to it. The best of the modern authorities agree that in the great field of subconscious mentation is to be found the explanation of much that is unexplainable otherwise. In fact, it is probable that before long consciousness will be regarded as a mere focusing of attention upon mental states, and the objects of consciousness merely as that portion of the contents of the mind in the field of mental vision created by such focusing. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5. Attention. Intimately connected with the object of consciousness is that process of the mind which we call attention. Attention is generally defined as the application of the mind to a mental state. It is often referred to as concentrated consciousness, but others have ventured the somewhat daring conjecture that consciousness itself is rather the result of attention, instead of the latter being an incident of consciousness. We shall not attempt to discuss this question here, except to state that consciousness depends very materially upon the degree of attention bestowed upon its object. The authorities place great importance upon the intelligent direction of the attention, and hold that without this the higher forms of knowledge are impossible. It is the common belief that we feel, see, hear, taste, and smell whenever objects affecting those senses come in contact with the organs of sense governing them. But this is only a partial truth. The real truth is that we become conscious of the report of these senses only when the attention is directed toward the sensation, voluntarily or involuntarily. That is to say, that in many cases, although the sense nerves and organs report a disturbance, the mind does not become consciously aware of the report unless the attention is directed toward it either by an act of will or else by reflex action. For instance, the clock may strike loudly, and yet we may not be conscious of the fact, for we are concentrating our attention upon a book. Or we may eat the choicest food without tasting it, for we are listening intently to the conversation of our charming neighbour. We may fail to perceive some startling occurrence happening under our very eyes, for we are buried in deep thought concerning something far removed from the present scene. There are many cases on record showing that one may be so interested in speaking, thinking, or acting that he will not experience pain that would otherwise be intolerable. Writers have forgotten their pain in the concentrated interest bestowed upon their work. Mothers have failed to feel pain when their infants required urgent attention. Orators have been so carried away by their own eloquence that they have failed to feel the pricking of the pin by means of which their friends have sought to attract their attention. Not only perception and feeling depend largely upon attention, but the processes of reasoning, memory, and even of will depend upon attention for much of their manifestation. Psychologists divide attention into two general classes, that is, 1. Voluntary attention, and 2. Involuntary attention. Voluntary attention is attention directed by the will to some object of our own more or less deliberate selection. It requires a distinct effort of the will in order to focus the attention in this way, and many persons are scarcely aware of its existence, so seldom do they manifest it. Voluntary attention is the result of training and practice, and marks the man of strong will, concentration, and character. Some authorities go so far as to say that much of that which is commonly called willpower is really but a developed form of voluntary attention, the man of strong will holding before him the one idea which he wishes to realize. Involuntary attention, often called Reflex attention is attention called forth by a nervous response to some sense stimulus. This is the common form of attention, and is but the same form which is so strongly manifested by children whose attention is caught by every new object, but which cannot be held for any length of time by a familiar or uninteresting one. It is of the utmost importance that one should cultivate his power of voluntary attention. Not only is the will power strengthened and developed in this way, but every mental faculty is developed by reason thereof. The training of the voluntary attention is the first step in mental development. Training the attention. That the voluntary attention may be deliberately trained and developed is a fact which many of the world's greatest men have proved for themselves. There is only one way to train and develop any mental power or faculty, and that is by practice and use. By practice, interest may be given to objects previously uninteresting, and thus the use of the attention develops the interest which further holds it. Interest is the natural road over which attention travels easily, but interest itself may be induced by concentrated attention. By studying and examining an object, the attention brings to light many new and novel features regarding the thing, and these produce a new interest, which in turn attracts further and continued attention. There is no royal road to the development of voluntary attention. The only true method is work, practice, and use. You must practice on uninteresting things, the primary interest being your desire to develop the power of voluntary attention. But as you begin to attend to the uninteresting thing, you will become interested in the task for its own sake. Take some object and place your mind upon it. Think of its nature, where it came from, its use, its associations, its probable future, of things related to it, etc., etc. Keep the attention firmly upon it, and shut out all outside ideas. Then, after a little practice of this kind, lay aside the object for the time being, and take it up again the next day, endeavouring to discover new points of interest in it. The main thing to be sought is to hold the thing in your mind, and this can be done only by discovering features of interest in it. The interest-loving attention may rebel at this task at first, and will seek to wander from the path into the green pastures which are found on either side thereof. But you must bring your mind back to the task again and again. After a time, the mind will become accustomed to the drill, and will even begin to enjoy it. Give it some variety by occasionally changing the objects of examination. The object need not always be something to be looked at. Instead, select some subject in history or literature and run it down, endeavouring to bring to light all the facts relating to it that are possible to you. Anything may be used as the subject or object of your inquiry. But what is chosen must be held in the field of conscious attention firmly and fixedly. The habit once acquired, you will find the practice most fascinating. You will invent new subjects or objects of inquiry, investigation, and thought, which in themselves will well repay you for your work and time. But never lose sight of the main point, the development of the power of voluntary attention. In studying the methods of developing and training the voluntary attention, the student should remember that any exercise which develops the will result in developing the attention, and likewise any exercise which develops the voluntary attention will tend to strengthen the will. The will and attention are so closely bound together that what affects one also influences the other. This fact should be borne in mind, and the exercises and practices based upon it. In practicing concentration of voluntary attention, it should be remembered that concentration consists not only of focusing the attention upon a given object or subject, but also of the shutting out of impressions from other objects or subjects. Some authorities advise that the student endeavour to listen to one voice among many, or one instrument among the many of a band or orchestra. Others advise the practice of concentrating on the reading of a book in a room filled by persons engaged in conversation, and similar exercises. Whatever aids in narrowing the circle of attention at a given moment tends to develop the power of voluntary attention. The study of mathematics and logic is also held to be an excellent practice in a concentration of voluntary attention, inasmuch as these studies require close concentration and attention. Attention is also developed by any study or practice which demands analysis of a whole into its parts, and then the synthesis or building up of a whole from its scattered parts. Each of the senses should play a part in the exercises, and in addition to this, the mind should be trained to concentrate upon some one idea held within itself, some mental image or abstract idea existing independently of any object of immediate sense report. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. Perception. It is a common mistake that we perceive everything that is reported to the mind by the senses. As a matter of fact, we perceive but a very small portion of the reports of the senses. There are thousands of sights reported by our eyes, sounds reported by our ears, smells reported by our nostrils, and contacts reported by our nerves of touch, every day of our lives, but which are not perceived or observed by the mind. We perceive and observe only when the attention, reflex or voluntary, is directed to the report of the senses, and when the mind interprets the report. While perception depends upon the reports of the senses for its raw material, it depends entirely upon the application to the mind for its complete manifestation. The student usually experiences great difficulty in distinguishing between sensation and perception. A sensation is a simple report of the senses which is received in consciousness. Perception is the thought arising from the feeling of the sensation. Perception usually combines several sensations into one thought or percept. By sensation the mind feels. By perception it knows that it feels, and recognizes the object causing the sensation. Sensation merely brings a report from outside objects, while perception identifies the report with the object which caused it. Perception interprets the reports of sensation. Sensation reports a flash of light from above. Perception interprets the light as starlight, or moonlight, or sunlight, or as the flash of a meteor. Sensation reports a sharp, pricking, painful contact. Perception interprets it as the prick of a pin. Sensation reports a red spot on a green background. Perception interprets it as a berry on a bush. Moreover, while we may perceive a simple single sensation, our perceptions are usually of a group of sensations. Perception is usually employed in grouping sensations and identifying them with the object or objects causing them. In its identification, it draws upon whatever memory of past experiences the mind may possess. Memory, imagination, feeling, and thought are called into play, to some extent, in every clear perception. The infant has but feeble perception, but as it gains experience, it begins to manifest perceptions and form percepts. Sensations resemble the letters of the alphabet, and perception the forming of words and sentences from the letters. Thus C, A, and T symbolize sensations, while the word cat, formed from them, symbolizes the perception of the object. It is held that all knowledge begins with sensation, that the mental history of the race or individual begins with its first sensation. But, while this is admitted, it must be remembered that sensation simply provides the simple elementary raw material of thought. The first process of actual thought, or knowledge, begins with perception. From our percepts, all of our higher concepts and ideas are formed. Perception depends upon the association of the sensation with other sensations previously experienced. It is based upon experience. The greater the experience, the greater is the possibility of perception, all else being equal. When perception begins, the mind loses sight of the sensation in itself, for it identifies it as a quality of the thing producing it. The sensation of light is thought of as a quality of the star. The pricking sensation is thought of as a quality of the pin or chestnut burr. The sensation of odour is thought of as a quality of the rose. In the case of the rose, the several sensations of sight, touch, and smell, in their impression of the qualities of colour, shape, softness, and perfume are grouped together in the percept of the complete object of the flower. A percept is that which is perceived, the object of the act of perception. The percept, of course, is a mental state corresponding with its outside object. It is a combination of several sensations which are regarded as the qualities of the outside object, to which are combined the memories of past experiences, ideas, feelings, and thoughts. A percept, then, while the simplest form of thought, is seen to be a mental state. The formation of a percept consists of three gradual stages, that is, 1. The attention forms definite conscious sensations from indefinite nervous reports. 2. The mind interprets these definite conscious sensations and attributes them to the outside object causing them. 3. The related sensations are grouped together, their unity perceived, and they are regarded as qualities of the outside object. The plain distinction between a sensation and a percept may be fixed in the mind by remembering the following. A sensation is a feeling. A percept is a simple thought identifying one or more sensations. A sensation is merely the conscious recognition of an excitation of a nerve end. A percept results from a distinct mental process regarding the sensation. Developing perception. It is of the utmost importance that we develop and train our powers of perception, for our education depends very materially upon our perceptive power. What matters it to us if the outside world be filled with manifold objects, if we do not perceive them to exist? Upon perception depends the material of our mental world. Many persons go through the world without perceiving even the most obvious facts. Their eyes and ears are perfect instruments, their nerves convey accurate reports, but the perceptive faculties of the mind fail to observe and interpret the report of the senses. They see and hear distinctly, but the reports of the senses are not observed or noted by them. They mean nothing to them. One may see many things, and yet observe but few. It is not upon what we see or hear that our stock of knowledge depends, so much as it does upon what we perceive, notice, or observe. Not only is one's stock of practical knowledge largely based upon developed perception, but one's success also depends materially upon the same faculties. In business and professional life, the successful man is usually he who has developed perceptive powers, he who has learned to perceive, observe, and note. The man who perceives and takes mental notes of what occurs in his world is a man who is apt to know things when such knowledge is needed. In this age of book education, we find that the young people are not nearly so observant as are those children who had to depend upon the powers of perception for their knowledge. The young Arab or Indian will observe more in an hour than the civilized child will in a day. To live in a world of books tends, in many cases, to weaken the powers of observation and perception. Perception may be developed by practice. Begin by taking notice of the things seen and heard in your usual walks. Keep wide open the eyes of the mind. Notice the faces of the people, their walk, their characteristics. Look for interesting and odd things, and you will see them. Do not go through life in a daydream, but keep a sharp lookout for things of interest and value. The most familiar things will repay you for the time and work of examining them in detail, and the practice gained by such tasks will prove valuable in your development of perception. An authority remarks that very few persons, even those living in the country, know whether a cow's ears are above, below, behind, or in front of her horns, nor whether cats descend from trees head first or tail first. Very few persons can distinguish between the leaves of the various kinds of familiar trees in their neighbourhood. Comparatively few persons are able to describe the house in which they live, at least beyond the most general features. The details are unknown. Houdin, the French conjurer, was able to pass by a shop window and perceive every article in it, and then repeat what he had seen. But he acquired this skill only by constant and gradual practice. He himself decried his skill and claimed that it was as nothing compared to that of the fashionable women who can pass another woman on the street and take in her entire attire, from head to foot, at one glance, and be able to describe not only the fashion and quality of the stuffs, but also say if the lace be real or only machine made. A former president of Yale is said to have been able to glance at a book and read a quarter of a page at one time. Any study or occupation which requires analysis will develop the power of perception. Consequently, if we will analyze the things we see, resolving them into their parts or elements, we will likewise develop the perceptive faculties. It is a good exercise to examine some small object, and endeavour to discover as many different points of perception as possible, noting them on a sheet of paper. The most familiar object, if carefully examined, will yield rich returns. If two persons will enter into a contest of this kind, the spirit of rivalry and competition will quicken the powers of observation. Those who have had the patience and perseverance to systematically practice exercises of this kind report that they notice a steady improvement from the very start. But even if one does not feel inclined to practice in this way, it will be found possible to begin to take notice of the details of things one sees, the expressions of persons' faces, the details of their dress, their tone of voice, the quality of goods we handle, and the little things especially. Perception, like attention, follows interest, but likewise interest may be created in things by observing their details, peculiarities, and characteristics. The best knowledge gained by one is that resulting from his own personal perception. There is a nearness and trueness about that which is lacking in that he merely believes because he has read or heard it. One can make such knowledge a part of himself. Not only is one's knowledge dependent upon what he perceives, but his very character also results from the character of his percepts. The influence of environment is great. And what is environment but things perceived about one? It is not so much what lies outside of one, as what part of it gets inside of one by perception. By directing his attention to desirable objects, and perceiving as much of them as is possible, one really builds his own character at will. The world needs good perceivers in all the walks of life. It finds a shortage of them, and is demanding them loudly, being willing to pay a good price for their services. The person who can voluntarily perceive and observe the details of any profession, business, or trade will go far in that vocation. The education of children should take the faculty of perception into active consideration. The kindergarten has taken some steps in this direction, but there is much more to be done. End of chapter 6. End of section 2.